As we study the 18th century, we have a problem. It's very difficult for us to envision what it was like 200 years ago, 250 years ago, 300 years ago. It's hard enough for us to get a grasp on what it was like in our area, say even 50 years ago or 100 years ago, what the environment was like, what the people were like. But it gets harder and harder as we go back in time to get an actual accurate glimpse. And so the best way we can get those ideas is to get first-hand accounts, get people to describe this scene for us. So if we want to know what it was like, 50 years ago, where we're at, we should find someone and ask them what it was like. Were there, what was the environment like? What were the buildings like? What were the trees like? Pictures can help us, but it isn't quite the same as when a person describes it to us. And it's really helpful when we could find someone who's excellent at describing these situations. We have a few of these happening in the 18th century. Peter Coleman and his book, where he's traveling through North America in, say, 1750. Excellent book for describing that, and we have that book available. We also think about, and Peter Coleman was one of these men, scientific men from the 18th century, and they really had the idea of let's collecting up these ideas and descriptions. And when they wrote their books, they wrote them with those ideas of describing them places and things for other people in other places. So they really went about describing these things almost specifically for us, and they really go into great detail. The 18th century does have some of these men with these scientific minds that are famous, that the names pop up for us today. Benjamin Franklin is one of those guys who's famous in North America for his scientific inquiry and knowledge. Another one that is famous is William Bartram. And William Bartram was a naturalist and a talented man with a lot of ideas and discoveries, and an excellent writer. And we've got this book that travels through North and South Carolina, Georgia, East and West Florida. If we want to know what the southeastern area of North America was like in the 18th century, and we want to get a glimpse, get someone to describe it for us, well, William Bartram does an excellent job, and he not only does that from a very scientific point of view, where he'll tell you about the scientific names of the plants and trees that he runs into in the area, but he also describes the people and his interactions with them and some of his own adventures. Here's a little section where he's starting to travel from South Carolina and then into Georgia. He wants to go and do some exploring in the Cherokee area that is in Georgia. And he's actually told at one point, well, you really should wait to get a guide to go into that area. He waits for a while for the guide, but he can't wait any longer, so he goes by himself. And he has his own adventures. He had, giant thunderstorm you can imagine. He finds a small hunting cabin that he resides in for, a day, dries out his clothes. All he has to eat is a little bit of ship's biscuit and a little bit of dried meat and a tiny bit of cheese. That's all he's got. But then later on here, he runs into a more civilized area. So let me read about this. In the evening, espying a human habitation at the foot of a sloping green hills beneath lofty forests of the mountains on the left hand, and at the same time observing a man crossing the river from the opposite shore in a canoe and coming towards me, I waited for his approach. He hailed me, and I answered that I was for Coe. So he's going to an area called Coe. He entreated me very civilly to call at his house and added that he would presently come to me. I was received and entertained here until the next day with most perfect civility. After I had dined towards evening, a company of Indian girls and inhabitants of a village in the hills at a small distance called, having baskets of strawberries, and this man, who kept here a trading house, being married to a Cherokee woman of a family that was indulged to keep a flock of cattle, and his helpmate, being an excellent housewife and very agreeable good woman, treated us with cream and strawberries. I'll bet that was really nice after his very limited diet. The next morning, after breakfasting on excellent coffee, relished with buck and venison, hot corn cakes, excellent butter and cheese, he sat forward again towards Coe. He travels a bit. Riding through this large town, he comes into a larger habitation. The road carried me winding about through their little plantations of corn and beans, etc., up to the council house, which was a very large dome or rotunda, situated on the top of an ancient artificial mound or mount. And here my road terminated. All before me on every side appeared little plantations of young corn and beans, etc., divided from each other by narrow strips or borders of grass which marked the boundaries of each one's property, their habitation standing in the middle. Finding no common high road to lead me through the town, I was now at a standstill how to proceed farther, when I observed an Indian man at the door of his habitation, 300 or 400 yards distance from me, and he beckoned me to come to him. I ventured to ride through their lots, being careful to do no injury to the young plants, the rising hopes of their labor and industry. I crossed a very little grassy vale watered by a silver stream, which gently undulated through, then ascending a green hill to the house, where I was cheerfully welcomed at the door and led in by the chief, giving the care of my horse to two handsome youths, his sons. During my continuance here, about half an hour, I experienced the most perfect and agreeable hospitality conferred on me by these happy people. I mean happy in their dispositions, in their apprehensions of rectitude, regard to our social and moral conduct. He goes on to describe some food that he served there. My venerable host, gracefully and with an air of respect, led me into an airy, cool apartment, where, being seated on cabins, his women brought in refreshing repast, consisting of sodden venison, hot corn cakes, etc., with a pleasant cooling liquor made of hominy well boiled, mixed afterwards with milk. This served up either before or after eating in a large bowl, with a very large spoon or a ladle to sup with it. He continues to go on. He is led through that area and kind of guided through into the next area. He really does some excellent descriptions of these things, and of course, not all of his adventures are easy or beautiful environs. He really has some difficulties, but he does a really, really good job of describing this area and gives us a glance of what it was like through the eyes of someone else, someone who was living in that time period. And these kinds of journals or books are so important for us to guide us into understanding what it was like in this area at this time. There are virtually no illustrations, no pictures for us. We really have to rely on the words of these people that were there at the time. And, many of the histories and books are just political in their nature. This kind of thing happened or that kind of thing happened. And it really doesn't give us a really good glimpse about, what the environment was like, what the people were like, and what it was like to travel through this area. So this is one of those great books that gives us an idea. And, he has all kinds of experiences with different kinds of people. Good experiences, bad experiences. It's easy for us here, 250 years later, to have a very, very narrow view of what it was like in the 18th century. That all the experiences of someone were similar. And so we stereotype the interactions that we think of in the past. But I don't think it's anything like that. People were having all kinds of experiences, good and bad, all kinds of interactions. And so when we get to read a book like this, we get a totally different glimpse of what it was like to live in the 18th century, and an idea about what it was specifically like here in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida in the 18th century. That it's not It's not an area that is as widely studied. And so a book like this, really important to understand that particular region during that time period. So just a little. I mean, it's a giant book, and there's so much to dip into and learn here. I haven't even gotten through all of it, but a very enjoyable read. If you're interested in this kind of a book, we got a bunch of different journals and cookbooks from the 18th century. I'll make sure to put a link down in the description section. And I want to thank you for coming along as we continue to explore and really just get a taste, just a tiny taste of what it was like in the 18th century. So much fun, so much to learn. So thanks for coming along and joining me as I sort of explore in these areas. And I want to thank you for all your great support, and thanks for watching today.